I need to get us up like that.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to SC Dawah Live. And today with me, as you can see, there are some very special guests. In fact, there's one special guest, the other one is a regular. And that's Brother Faraz Zahabi, who does not need an introduction, as you guys know, mashallah. But one thing I did want to highlight, something about Brother Faraz, is that he actually studied philosophy at the University of Concordia, I believe. And mashallah, he is very well versed with the sort of questions that are very important nowadays about faith, meaning, value, why do we exist, how do we challenge the issues of scientism, and all these types of philosophies that are coming up. So firstly, Assalamu alaikum to you both.
Assalamu alaikum.
And just so everybody's on the same page, fighting faith, what is this about? Well, in a world in which faith is ridiculed, faith is seen as something childish, and there's a fight against faith. There is this idea that faith is outdated and it doesn't really make sense and has all these challenges. The question is, fighting faith, does it lead to detriments in society, such as people not having respect, people having existential questions? Why do I exist? What's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? What happens after we die? Can a society function without meaning, essentially the backdrop of meaning? And also, the sort of morals we have, the innate morals that we have, the idea of right and wrong and all these types of things, how does any of this make sense if we continuously fight faith? And what we want to do is actually, before going to both of our panelists and discussing this in depth, what we want to do is we want to play a video from Khabib speaking about the value of faith and why he wants to share the message of Islam with non-Muslims. Apologies, we seem to be having some technical issues. If the video doesn't play, I will simply have to regurgitate what Khabib actually said. So just give me a moment, just while the video is getting ready, just some of your initial thoughts. Okay, here we go. The video is ready. Excellent. Just waiting for the sound now. There's no sound at the moment.
I just fly. When my time comes, I'm gonna die, you know. But before my time comes, I wanna be fly, you know. I wanna be free. I wanna do whatever I want, you know. I wanna spend time with my family, friends, with my people, you know. I wanna live in my village, and because even if we have all war, we're gonna die. Everything is gonna be finished one day, and a couple people gonna come to grave, put you inside the and finish, you know. That's why I don't wanna put like crazy goal in front of me, you know. Like very soon, I think like soon my career gonna finish. Of course, I'm not on beginning my way, and soon it's gonna be finished, and I'm gonna beginning my new life, you know, without all this like interview, without all this like with media stuff, like weight cutting, hard training, like focusing. I'm gonna beginning like new life, and for life I don't need like too much, you know. Even if you're billionaire, you never eat more than one bread in one day, you know. That's why it's like I wanna be free. I wanna fly, and I wanna do whatever I want, whatever I need when I die, because I really believe the next life, and it's gonna everything what you did, everything what you're gonna do in next life, you have to do something what important for you in next life, you know. Like my father always talk about this with me, like he always tried to do something good for people around him, and for people from his country, from his village, for his family. He always do something, and he always say, I hope this is gonna help me for next life.
Brilliant. Thank you, admin, for playing that video. So I just want some initial thoughts from Brother Firas and Hijab about faith. So let's just first go over to something quite simple, and going over to Brother Firas, that what do you think is the role of faith, and why is faith important to you?
Well, I think he said it beautifully. And without a faith, what's the point of going on? What is the point? I mean, if your children grow up to be successful or they wither away and die in their youth, what's the difference? They live for a blink of an eye. You live for a blink of an eye. What is the purpose of survival and reproduction? For what? For what purpose? Where's the end goal? If you're an atheist and you follow that road if you go far enough, if you go deep enough, you're gonna end up in a place we call nihilism. There's just no other way. There's just no other exit. And when you're gonna get to nihilism, you're gonna realize that if you're an atheistic materialist philosopher, you're gonna realize that if I rearrange my bed, if I mess up my bed, it's the same thing if I did that to a human being. I'm just rearranging matter. Human beings are just matter. There is nothing else to them. This is the philosophy of Stalin, Hitler, Zedong. There's no soul. If I cut your head off and put it on my table, it's the same as if I picked up a rock off the floor and put it on my table. I'm just rearranging the matter here in the universe. But we all intuitively know that this is not the case. So there's something special to human beings. There's something called life. Even though we cannot define life perfectly, pinpointing the essence of life, defining life is very, very difficult. We still know that it exists. We know this intuitively, whether you're a logical person or not, whether you're a scientific person or not. And Khabib is in touch with that, and he's expressing that there is something more. There's something greater than what we perceive as just matter in the world colliding against one another.
Absolutely. And I think you said it in a very profound way, that what would be the implications of an atheistic worldview? Well, someone's head being chopped off or putting a rock on someone's table. I mean, it's just a rearrangement of matter at the end of it. Now, just before I move on to Hijab, you touched upon nihilism, right? That fighting faith essentially will lead to nihilism. Could you just unravel that a little bit for us? What is nihilism, and who's spoken about it, and what's the implications of nihilism for us today?
Well, here it is. In the West, it's taboo to talk about death. It's very taboo. We say they passed on, they kicked the bucket. We have like 1,001 ways to express death in a way where we sweep it under the rug. Why? Because you're raining on my parade. We have this beautiful parade, and this parade is amazing. It's beautiful. And now when you talk to me about death, you're just raining on it. I want to focus on the fun that I have. Why? Because when I'm having fun, I forget about death. Death is forgotten. So I liken it to being in a car crash. Imagine you're being in a car crash and you were enjoying your car ride. This car ride is about to end drastically. We're all going to die in this car ride. Yes, but if we don't think about the crash, let's not think about it. We can still enjoy this moments, the few moments we have left during this car crash. Now, this is the same logical assessment you're doing. We're all going to die. This is truth. In the West, if you talk about death, it's kind of like you're breaking my ears. I don't want to talk about this topic. It's the saddest topic. You're raining on my parade. You're killing my fun. Let's focus on having fun. Well, guess what? You're going to have fun. You're going to distract yourself for a long time. And then all of a sudden, you're going to have this incredible anxiety at the end of your life. Why? And it's not even going to come at the end of your life. It's going to come much sooner. See, when you're 1 year old and you turn 2 years old, that 1 year is 50% of your life. It's so long. It feels like it's forever. When you go from 9 years old to 10 years old, that was 10% of your life. Look, at 10 years old now, 1 year is 10% of your life. When you go from 99 years old to 100 years old, that was 1 day. So not only are you dying, but not only you are in this car crash, which we're all eventually going to die in this car crash, it's accelerating. It's happening faster and faster. The older you get, the faster death is coming towards you. The shorter your life seems. Yes, you live 365 days, but that 365 days seems like a week to me. The older you get, the faster you live life, the faster time passes. The problem just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You have to make peace with the fact that you're going to die. And I think that's the only way you could truly enjoy life, because you're always going to have this deep inner anxiety that you're denying, that you're ignoring, the elephant in the room. And you're going to have this facade of joy and happiness, but deep down inside, you've never dealt with the root of the problem. If you've never made your peace with the root of the problem, you're always going to have this type of anxiety, or a very deeply rooted anxiety.
Absolutely.
And if I could just give you one evidence to that, like, there's so many developed countries that they have an incredible market for antidepressants. Everybody, I know so many people that take antidepressants. It's incredible. But you live in the West, you have an abundance of food, shelter, money, freedoms. You have everything. Why are you all on antidepressants? Well, that they haven't dealt with the root problem of all their fears, all their anxieties. What is the root problem of all their conflicts amongst one another? It's this root problem that they know they're going to die. Deep down inside, subconsciously, they know they're going to die and they don't want to think about it.
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, no one wants to talk about it. You're breaking my ears. I don't want to talk about death, right? And even though we try and avoid it, like you said, we have to come to terms with it. And if we're at peace with it, and once we recognize what the truth is, we can deal with the problem. But if you just brush it away, time is going very fast, and time does go very, it speeds up, or it seems to speed up as we're getting older. So Hijab, before we get into nihilism and the implications of being faithless, in the world today, faith is being fought through scientism and Darwinism and feminism and liberalism and humanism and all these types of philosophies. And you spent a great deal of your time, and you've dedicated your life to refuting these philosophies and refuting those who are fighting faith. So just to begin off with, why is faith important to you, and why do you do what you do?
I think faith is always going to be an integral aspect of life, whether you're a believer in religion or not. And why it's important, why Islamic faith in particular, being a believer in one God, being worthy of worship and anchoring the purpose of life is important to me, is because I feel like that is the most coherent explanation for why I exist, where I came from, what I'm doing here, and where I'm going. The three most ultimate questions that one must grapple with. And so I feel like, in a nutshell, really, I feel like, if you have that kind of anchorage, if you have that spiritual anchorage, it really allows you to live a fulfilled life. Like Faraz Zahabi was saying, I really think that without this belief, each day that I kind of live, and I think the vividity and the clarity of his imagery there when he was talking about life being like almost a car crash that everyone's going, I think that was a very powerful metaphor, to be honest. And that's the reality. We're kind of, and the Quran says, إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَى رَبِّكَ كَدَحًا فَمُلَاقِيهِ. You are literally it's like you're being propelled to Allah. You're running towards Him, you're going towards Him, and then you're going to meet Him. And when I go on planes, and there's this kind of like conveyor belt before I go into the airport, it's kind of moving escalator, right? Life is like that moving escalator. Like we're one stage at a time moving towards death. And actually, Hassan al-Basri, one of the Tabi'een, said something quite powerful. He said that we are all days. We are a composite of days, and each day we lose a part of ourselves. It's kind of like a snowman. Like, we're all snowmen. We're walking snowmen. We're walking and we're melting, and we just need to get things done and know what the purpose of life is before we melt away totally and we're fully disintegrated into the earth. So yeah, I feel like why it's important for me, number one, is because it gives me that spiritual anchorage. Number two is because it makes me make sense of pain, which I don't think anyone has the ability to do except for someone in my position. And this is really, I think, communicated most beautifully by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in one of my favorite hadiths of all time, which is "Ajaban li amri al-mu'min." Wondrous is the affair of the believer. إن أمره كله له خير, and that all of his affair is good. وليس ذاك لأحد إلا للمؤمن, and this is not the case for anyone except for the believer. إن أصابته سراء شكر, if good things happen to him, he is thankful. When أصابته ضراء صبر وشكر, and if bad things happen to him, he is patient, he is and he's thankful. So it allows me to make sense of pain, because life is pain. The Quran says لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد, we have created human beings in toil. Toil, literally, you're going to be struggling. You're going to be struggling whether you're a Muslim, a non-Muslim, religious, irreligious, whatever. And so Islamic monotheism allows me to spiritually ground myself, make sense of pain. And if you reach the highest levels of spirituality in Islam, you reach a stage called ihsan, which is roughly translated to excellence or even perfection, you could say. And that state is basically where every waking moment of your life translates to a meaningful spiritual experience that you have with God. And the Prophet said about it, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. It's as if you're worshipping Allah as if you can see him, because if you can't see him, he can see you. So when you reach that high level spiritual state, it's like everything becomes meaningful, to your mid-morning nap, to even in Faras's world, your mid-morning sessions in the gym. Everything becomes extremely meaningful, and more so than just being, okay, I'm exercising because I'm exercising. I'm exercising because actually it's a spiritual thing for me now. I'm connecting this to my spiritual being, not just because it's a bodily activity. And so for all those reasons and more, I feel like faith is the biggest ni'mah, the biggest blessing that I have been blessed with. There's nothing in my life that is more powerful or more grounding or more satiating or more satisfying or more beautiful than it. And you can see that with Khabib Nurmagomedov as well, like in his comments. And that's what people, why they're drawn towards him, because of that spiritual magneticism they have towards him. They can see the humility, and they can see his belief really pouring out. And it just makes things worthwhile, man.
SubhanAllah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And since you triggered that topic of faith helping with pain, and just before you joined, I was speaking to Firas about how society is a veneer, and underneath the veneer there's a Hobbesian selfishness, right? So you have the London riots, or with the coronavirus, so people are going crazy. Life, we're going to face tests, we're going to face financial problems, personal problems. Our loved ones are going to pass away, we're going to all get old. I mean, there's so many of these types of things, and it's very hard to deal with these problems and the problem of evil and suffering if you don't have faith. Arthur Schopenhauer, he felt that there was a formula to this, and the formula was that the inevitability of death, coupled with the immediate experience of suffering, which we all go through, collectively makes us search for meaning, right? And that's why we're desperate for meaning. We crave meaning. Some evolutionary psychologists, for this reason, are actually arguing against new atheism and saying, well, how can you try to get rid of religion and get rid of this meaning, this rich background which gives you this meaning, which allows society and civilization to flourish, and how can you just get rid of that and give people a pure vacuum? So on this concept of using faith to deal with the problem of evil and suffering, so Brother Firas, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, do you mean on them wanting to eliminate spirituality, or the fact that human beings are a veneer of morality?
Let's start with the idea of how faith helps against the inevitability of pain and suffering and eventual death.
Well, I'll tell you something. I'll give you a really good example of that. My son, Ayman, my younger son, he was crying because his grandfather had died. His grandfather on my wife's side had died. And while he was crying, I was trying to console him. And I asked him why he was crying. He said, I'm never going to see him again. This is what he told me. He said, I'm never going to see him again. And he started crying. And I asked him a question. I said to him, how did you meet him the first time? What brought you together the first time? He looked at me. He's like, well, how did I come here the first time? And this is the cyclical argument. So for instance, the cyclical argument could be put this way. If you fell asleep at 7 p.m., at 6:59, you must have been awake. To fall asleep, you have to be awake. To grow taller, you first have to be shorter. This is a logical necessity. To get bigger, you first have to be smaller. You were in a state of being smaller, now you're in a state of being bigger. To die, you have to first be alive. To be born, you have to first be what? You have to be dead, non-existent. Call it what you will. I asked him, how did you come to life the first time and you met him? How? I said to him, the same way you met him the first time, you're going to meet him again the second time. Say inshallah. Say inshallah, Allah is going to bring me again, like he did the first time. And this is the truth. No matter how logical you are, no matter how scientific you are, whether you agree with what I just said or not, I don't care. I have proof that this life exists, and that's proof of the next life. I have a faith that like I woke up in this life, and I didn't apply for it. I didn't pass a logics exam. I didn't do a scientific experiment to figure out how to come into existence. I did none of that. I woke up in this world. And I came from death, non-existence, whatever you want to label it as. And when I die, I believe that the contraries are going to generate themselves again. Like I went from life to death, like I went from death to life, and now life to death. Again, I'm going to come from death to life. And this is why I believe that it's observed. It's scientific, my belief. We observed this in the past, that people came from non-existence into existence. It's observed. Babies are born every day. Where were they? With this child, where was he 100 years ago? He didn't exist. This life, this thing we call life that we cannot identify or put in a test tube, when we observe it in nature, we see that it comes from, who knows? How could we say we know how it generates? I believe Allah generates life in a way that's beyond our understanding. So when I die, I have a faith I'm going to come back to life like I came back to life in this life, like I came to life the first time.
SubhanAllah. I think there's a verse of the Quran in Surah Baqarah, Hijab, maybe you can help me out, where something along the line, exactly like Brother Faraz was saying about.
Of course, this is the inspiration. Yeah. When the grass dies, Allah sends the rain and the grass grows again.
Yes.
If you reflect on it, there's a sign for you here. There's a cycle of life and death. Where did life come from? Well, first it was dead. Allah sprung it to life. I have a nice little example I like to give about this, because the thing is, people are not they're not aware of how illogical and unscientific life is. This life is this thing that is, you cannot put it in a test tube. So allow me to give you this example I find that sums up a lot of thousands of years of philosophical thinking. Okay, so imagine I was creating a robot. Okay, this robot is Sabur 2.0. Instead of skin, this robot's going to have sheet metal. Instead of bones, it's going to have steel pipes for bones. Instead of an eye, I'm going to put him a camera. Instead of a brain, I'm going to put him a computer. And this Sabur 2.0, he's just like you. He talks like you. He laughs like you. Everything that you find delicious, he likes to eat. His behavior is identical to you. He follows you around. He learns your behavior. He becomes more and more like you every single day. Now I take Sabur 2.0 one day and I mangle him. I scrap him. I turn him to scrap metal. Now my question to you is, did I commit murder or did I damage property?
Murder, I hope.
If I destroyed the robot, but he's identically like you, but he's missing something. There's something about him and you that there's a difference between the two of you. So I would say he doesn't have life. He is a very sophisticated vending machine. You know, a vending machine, you punch in a code and if you put in B4, it'll give you the chips. If you put in C1, it'll give you the can of Coke. Algorithms are followed this way. The robot is fed a stimulus. So imagine I tickle the robot and I tell him, when you receive the stimulus, you make the sound, you laugh. But I could have programmed him to cry when I tickle him. A robot does not have this substance of life inside him. He gives the appearance of life, but he's not truly alive. Okay, now there are many thought experiments in philosophy that point this out. the appearance of life is not life. Now, how do we know this? We just do. We have this very deep instinct. We can recognize what life is. However, we cannot define it. We have this trouble defining it. We definitely cannot put it in a test tube. So what is the difference between you and this robot? Because a materialist philosopher would tell me there's no difference between Sabur, the original, and Sabur 2.0. It's just a material difference. Just the substances are different. However, their parts are the same. They function the same. But what I'm telling you is there's an element that's alien to us, that's alien to this world. It's a transient substance. It's a substance we cannot find when we look at the table of elements. We cannot find it. However, we have an intuitive first-hand experience of it.
That's a good example. It's actually quite sticky, and interestingly, with the soul, and with these sort of ideas that in neuroscience and in the materialistic, mechanistic sort of philosophy, they try and brush this aside. But like you said, it's very counterintuitive, and it's very hard to actually think of human beings like that. So I just want to go to Hijab just before we come back to the other new atheism stuff and the veneer stuff. So Hijab, what's your thoughts on this thing that Faraz is saying?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very powerful example. And I had the conversation with Hamza Zorsis, which followed a similar trajectory, but we were talking about consciousness. And I think life and consciousness are inextricably linked. But this, I think, is very pertinent to especially the AI discussion. And I think that we need to be writing stuff about this. I think Faraz should as well. I think he should, because people know him for being one of, if not the greatest MMA trainer of all time. But I think that what makes him quite special, like his BJJ trainer John Danaher, is that he's got a background in philosophy. I don't know if that translates to the mats or the cage or whatever it is, but I do think that it's these kinds of ideas we need to pen down now, because especially in a world where we're going to start speaking about AI rights and stuff like that, we're already having these conversations. It's I think philosophy that's going to be the inroad to these conversations, and for us as Muslims, gives us, and not just Muslims but theists and religious people in general, an ability to kind of counter back in a very logical way. And so these are very powerful arguments, and it shows you that there is this missing ingredient. And I remember actually bringing this up in a discussion or a debate I had with Edward Tabash, because he was talking about, when I went to California and I did a debate there, he was talking about miracles at one point, and he was basically arguing against God because of the existence of miracles. He says that miracles are something, and obviously he's an empiricist and so on. He's a materialist. Materialistic empiricist. So what I said to him is that, how do you define miracles? And he defined it almost the same as David Hume would define it. And then I said to him, so how, because if it's something that comes out of the natural order, whatever definition David Hume came up with, how do you explain abiogenesis, the idea that chemistry eventually became biology? Frankly, that's what differentiates the study of chemistry from the study of biology is life. That's what differentiates the two. But there must have been a time where basically chemistry became biology, and they call this abiogenesis. I'm sure, obviously, Sabur would know more about this than me. You're doing a lot of work on it now. But how did that transition take place? There must have been something that happened here. But that thing that happened wasn't observable. It wasn't something which was a pattern that we can see happening now. So effectively, it was a miraculous thing, because it was something which cannot be explained by the scientific.
It's the true life Pinocchio story. You guys have Pinocchio in England?
Yeah.
How did he go from a wooden boy to a real boy? There's a transition that's unexplainable.
Yeah, and that's what it is. And so for us, we basically posit the fact that there is a famous saying in Arabic, فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه, which is that the thing that doesn't possess a property cannot give it. It's a famous it's a famous thing that we say. My mom used to say it to me when I used to try and pretend to have knowledge. She said, well, if you have knowledge, well, فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه, or something like that. The one who doesn't have something can't give it. So it's a famous Arab, but okay, so chemistry doesn't possess properties of life, right? Or the chemistry, the corpus of just chemistry, like natural chemistry. So how does something give off something that it doesn't have? Right?
Correct.
If you think about it, how could it allow for biology and it doesn't even possess it? You see, and so that's why you have these kind of, when I've been looking at the theories, I'm sure obviously you guys have done more research on this point, on abiogenesis and how that took place. You think, well, these are all kind of mythical, fictitious stories. You've made your own narratives. You've made your own religious narratives, but you've just packed it nicely into scientific jargon, because you need to find some kind of explanation of how chemistry became biology. But if you really think about what we're saying Al-Hayy, because one of the names of God for us is the living one, right? Al-Hayy, the living one, he endowed, if you like, or imbued dead things with life. So what we're saying is much more coherent. We're saying that the source of life gave off life. That's what we're saying. Well, what they're saying is that non-living matter transformed into living matter, but the mechanism, we don't know how. The agency, there is no agency. So it seems like that's the real magic trick. That's the religious story. That's the real myth, if you like. And so I think we really have a powerful point here when it comes to life and when it comes to real life and how this all takes place, because quite frankly, you can try your best to try and create life, and the Quran actually posits a challenge. You know, it says, you know, if everybody comes, لن يخلقوا ذبابا ولو اجتمعوا له, they won't even be able to create a fly, meaning an insignificant insect, you will not even be able to produce that. And even if you all come together, because basically there's a missing ingredient, you can produce the most high-tech robots you like, but this fly, it has life in it. You're not going to be able to deal with that.
If I can maybe try to put it in a simple term for people who are not trained in philosophy and people haven't had these discussions, and you want to try to understand what's being said, a good example would be take your cell phone for instance. You have the hardware, you have your cell phone. I take your cell phone and I break it, and now your cell phone is gone. It's dead. It's finished. It's been destroyed. And then I hand you a new cell phone, the new iPhone, the same cell phone you used to have, very similar, and you turn it on, and now you go into your account and all your pictures are in there, all your information is in there. It's the same phone, the same phone number. I can call you on your phone now. Your phone is alive again. It's working. Well, what happened? I saw you break this phone. I saw you break its material compounds. I saw you break them in half. I saw you destroy the phone, and now you handed me a new phone and it works again and it's alive again. Well, I will tell you, okay, now you have this cell phone. I have to teach you about the cell phone tower. The cell phone tower is sending the information in the phone. The phone is the brain. The cellular data is the mind. The mind and brain are separate, are different. If I break the brain, the mind, you no longer observe it, but it's still out there. You know, in science, they say nothing goes nowhere. Everything goes somewhere. You know, it's a scientific fact. It's an axiom that everything in the universe goes somewhere. Nothing ever disappears. The human mind and the human brain, materialist philosophers will say, look, if I make a hole in your head, your mind is gone. Therefore, the mind is dependent on the brain. This is the materialist philosopher. He says the brain is first, primary, and the brain gives off a type of, the train is metallic, and it gives off a steam. And that is your brain, that is your mind. Your mind is an illusion. That's what they say. Now we can flip the model, because that's not the only possibility. And the reason why we flip the model is because that model has a major contradiction in it. The only reason I know I have a brain is via the mind. There is no brain in the history of humanity that was observed outside of a mind. You need a mind to observe the brain. So we say the mind is primary, or they are parallel. See, another possibility is that they are parallel. Now in the Quran, there's actually a very beautiful verse that Al-Jalani refers to. The two rivers, Allah set two rivers side by side with an impenetrable barrier. And this is what they refer to as the seen and the unseen. So you have a physical body that's seen, your cell phone, the thing you hold in your hand. And then there's this unseen thing, which we all have in our minds. We all have this mind. Ghazali said, he called it the heart. He said, not the lump of flesh, that other thing. And this brings us to the beetle in the box. You see, this one thing that we speak of. So let's say, for instance, Try to remember when you were a little child and the first time you saw a dog. We pointed to a dog and we made the sound dog, and you associated the word dog with that animal. And then one day I showed you a bicycle and I taught you everything in the dunya. I taught it to you like this. I pointed to it and I made a sound, and then you started associating the sound with that thing I showed you. If I showed you the color red, I would say red, and you would associate the sound red with this color. You had to have an experience in the dunya and somebody had to teach you its name. However, this mind of yours, the mind is not, we never pointed to it. This is what we call the beetle in the box. Everybody has a box and nobody can look in each other's boxes. I can't look in your box, Sabur. I can't look at Muhammad Hijab's box. We all look inside. I could see inside my box. You could all see inside your own box, but nobody could see one another's box. And I have a beetle in there. That's the mind. This is the experience of the mind. The mind is this known secret that we cannot point to. I can only know it intuitively. That's why Imam Ghazali was so big on intuition. Now, that cell phone, when the scientist goes out, he can only see the cell phone. He can only touch the cell phone. But this data, when I break your cell phone and then I give you another one, that data, that information, that stuff that's known by the mind, the unseen, can never be put into a test tube. It can never be touched. It can never be known via the senses. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's known directly. It's known via intuition.
Absolutely. Actually, Brother Firas has an excellent video, the Abrahamic experience, in which he breaks this down.
This is an important video, this one.
Yeah, I mean, that video is, I mean, the way I see it is it's like a flanking maneuver against atheism. I mean, it's a way of tackling their sort of worldview by showing actually it's a non-starter. I mean, the very premise of beginning is actually problematic. We could do that as a separate thing, because I think that's going to take you time to bring out. Now, going back to this idea of fighting faith, right? So we spoke about obviously the value of faith and the implications of not having faith. Now, for both of you, I'm going to keep this as a sort of open question. Both of you have studied philosophy for quite a long time, and obviously there's this idea that, you know, faith is for people who don't really reason, but if you reason, you don't really need faith. Faith is something you can avoid. You don't really need to have faith. Then you have some people saying, actually, no, faith in a way is unavoidable, and it's actually inevitable when you actually even philosophically try to justify a particular worldview. You still have axioms, you still have unquestionable assumptions and whatnot. So hijab, what would you say about faith? Would you say it's something that we can totally discard if we're studying and we're using our logic and our mind and whatnot, that faith is dispensable?
I think you've kind of answered your own question in a sense there, because axioms by definition are things with no evidence. Like, you have to believe in them as they're brute facts in a sense. Like when you do mathematics, axioms, there's no proof for them, but you have to operate with them, because how else are you gonna do maths? Likewise with logic, these are the base of how we operate, and so no one can claim to have no faith in something without evidence. This is a false claim, and this is really the claim of the new atheists. And I think it's to do with the ignorance that they have of the philosophies, of these kind of like philosophies of mathematics, philosophies of science, and so on and so forth. Logical positivism in the 20s or 30s came out of fashion because they realized that the statements that they were making with themselves not verifiable through empirical means, and so they were meaningless statements. For example, the claim itself that any statement that is not empirically justified is meaningless according. It says irony of that. So anyone who says, well, we don't have faith in things which are without evidence, is basically fundamentally ignorant of those facts like axioms and so on. And moreover, I would say that, in fact, you can't even explain why you have your rational faculties on an atheistic model. Like, how can you explain? What's the explanation for?
Just before we go to that, because that's a topic I definitely want to cover off straight after this point. So just because you touched upon logical positivism and you know the cultural scientism, which is a byproduct of that logical positivist movement, I just remembered there was a very popular discussion that Brother Firas had with Joe Rogan, in which Joe Rogan obviously, had the view that science is perhaps something that gives a certainty, and that it's not faith, it's not woo woo. That's the word that was actually used, and that clip went viral, and in fact there's a lot of discussion online about that. So for us, could you sort of give us a sort of
Well, here's my point of view. Okay, in atheism, or no, listen, I'm a big believer in science. Okay, Muslims should not be anti-scientific. We should be very scientific. The golden age of Islam was built by very scientific Muslims. Okay, but here's the thing: in Islam, the point of view in Islam, there's only one God. There's only one force. There's only one power. Everything you see around you, that only comes from one power. Now, here's the atheists have a God. They do have a God, but their God has no agency. He's blind. They call him randomness. They say, look, this dunya came to be, this world came to be because there's this force called randomness out there. This is their deity. I asked them, okay, can you put randomness in a test tube for me so I can study it? No, we can't put it in a test tube. Well, how did you come up with this idea of randomness? We observed it. Well, show me. I want to observe it as well with you. And every time I observe it, I never see it. So I'm going to make this extremely simple. I'm going to give you the catapult experiment, okay, the thought experiment. I fire a catapult, okay, and the projectile falls on point A. Now let's reset the entire universe. Every molecule of air, every single grain of sand is reset. Every body in the universe is reset exactly the way it was. And I fire that catapult again. Now here's the dilemma. If it's going to land on point A again, where is this force randomness? Why wasn't it at play? And if it doesn't land on point A, let's say it lands on a new point, point B, well, that would mean that science is not reproducible. If I give you perfect control, don't forget, in this thought experiment, I have a perfect control. Every heavenly body has been put back in its position. Every grain of sand, every molecule of water, everything has been reset perfectly. I have a perfect control. Which one is it? Does randomness exist and it lands somewhere else? Or does it land on point A every single time? And therefore, we cannot believe in randomness. Randomness, there's no force in this equation. The causal line is complete. The causal chain is perfect. There is no randomness. There is no fluctuation in any way. Yeah. Now, I have to ask you guys, where is randomness? If it lands on point A, and I think we'd all agree that it lands exactly on point A. Where is randomness? Now, if there is no randomness, and now it's just an expression, it's just a figure of speech. Randomness just means that I don't have the ability to follow all the variables. So for instance, let me give you a for instance, okay? Let's say we're playing pool. This is the one I use with Rogan, okay? And I hit the balls, I break the balls. I hit the cue ball and then, that triangle thing, I do a break. And the balls spread seemingly randomly across the table. Now a layman, when he's looking at that, he's gonna say, look, the cue ball hit the balls and they went randomly across the table. Then I take that same layman and I educate him for 15 years about physics. I make him a PhD in physics. And then I tell him, look, I'm going to hit the same ball. I'm going to hit the same billiard balls, the same velocity, the same angle. And he's going to tell me exactly which ball is going to be where. He can predict. Nothing is random to him anymore. Now, the first time I showed him the break, he thought it was random. He projected randomness onto the table. Randomness is a reflection of our inability to follow all the variables. It's a reflection of our ignorance. When I say that, look, the world landed here because of randomness, that's saying, look, I am the center of the universe. The way I see the dunya, the way I see the world is the true way. Whereas Allah tells you in the Quran, no, Allah didn't put every heavenly body is exactly where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
When you look at a clock, the inner workings of a clock is not random, they're precise. The universe is simply like a clock. There is no room for randomness. There is no room for any other type of force. Even, you see where, Muhammad, you were saying earlier that, a believer, he starts seeing everything is related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, the Al-Ashari, Imam Al-Ashari, he believes in occasionalism. There's actually only one force in the universe. Every other force, gravity. If you're familiar with the problem of causation, many people are not familiar. I would tell you that less than 1% of the population is familiar with the problem of causation. There is no force out there that we have observed We cannot put gravity in a test tube. We cannot put any force whatsoever, centripetal force, any type of force, randomness. We cannot put in a test tube. These are all things that are thought up in the human mind. They are never observed. These are ghosts you're projecting onto the world. And La ilaha illallah is to mean that I've eliminated every ghost. I've smashed every idol. But there's only one idol I can't smash. It's not an idol. It's the source of them all, of all motion in the universe. Okay, Al-Ashri taught us this very well. He taught it Imam Ghazali. Imam Ghazali championed this belief. There's only one force. Now in the Quran, the Prophet he's quoted. You guys know the famous Battle of Badr. The Prophet alayhi salam, he throws the rocks, the stones. And Allah says, you threw, but it's Allah that threw. You think you threw, but it's Allah that threw. Every single motion you see in the universe can be retraced back to the initial mover. The initial mover. The universe is clockwork. And then we're going to have to talk about free will another day, maybe. But the universe is determined. Muslims have to understand that the point of view of the Quran is that the world is perfectly determined. In a deterministic universe, there cannot be randomness. There is no randomness in a deterministic universe. Any randomness is a projection of the human mind onto the dunya. And it's a projection of the human mind because of your arrogance. This is the truth. You think that you see the dunya as it is, but you don't. You think you see the world as it is. Like the layman, when he first saw the pool balls break, he thought they were random. Then we educated him. We alleviated his ignorance. Now he's a master of physics, and he's like, no, nothing is random. Actually tell you where every ball is going to land.
Yeah.
Precisely. Of course, this is the point of view of, if you read the Quran, everything is done precisely. There's nothing at random.
Absolutely. And it's a beautiful concept to internalize as well, because going back a few steps to when we were speaking about the problem of evil, a brother rang us a few years ago, and he wanted to accept Islam, and we met him. He took the Shahada, and what was very interesting is he went through an extreme amount of pain in life. I mean, in his personal life and things that happened to him. And what convinced him of the truthfulness of Islam is, of course, Tawheed and other things. But one thing that he said is that made him feel so good is that everything is predetermined. That everything that was supposed to happen has happened. He couldn't have escaped it. Whatever arrow hit him was supposed to hit him. Whatever missed him was never supposed to get him. And that's such a liberating thought. It's not a constraining thought. It's such a liberating thought. So not only conceptually, like you said, there is no such thing as randomness and everything is predetermined, but even from a faith perspective, it's so empowering that Allah ultimately is in control. And you put it in a very beautiful way.
Well,
ultimately, la ilaha illallah. That's the only force.
Let's scale it even higher. We took a layman who saw a pool game. He was observing a pool game, and then we alleviated his ignorance. Now when he sees the same pool game, he's like, oh, it's all ordered. Now imagine you had the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, zero ignorance, and you looked at the dunya. You could read the dunya like a book. So we have something in philosophy called abduction. Think Sherlock Holmes. He comes into a room and he says, there was a murder here, and the murderer did this way, and then he followed these steps, and then he hid the weapon here. I bet you if you open this drawer, you're going to find the weapon. Then you open the drawer and the weapon is there. He used abduction. He looked around the room and he said, there's only one possibility. Well, if you had the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you could look at the dunya as it is today. Just see this one scene, and you could deduce what happened in the past. You could deduce what happened in the future. To Allah, everything is known. That nothing happens by surprise. But this is now, let me ask you this question. Was the layman, when he was uneducated, was he seeing the truth when he saw the billiard balls being random? No, it was a reflection of his ignorance. But if he said the balls are random, what happened here on this table was random, he would be taking the center of the universe. He would be saying the truth is the way I see it.
Yeah.
But the Quran is talking to you about truth is the way Allah sees it. When you have no ignorance, then you will understand the Quran. Everything you disagree with the Quran is because it's a reflection of your ignorance or / arrogance. The dunya is the way I see it, the way I perceive it. Well, you only have 5 senses. You cannot imagine the other possible senses that there are. You cannot imagine so many things that are beyond your experience.
Yeah.
But one thing I think Muslims have to study more, if they want to, I believe, understand Islam to a greater degree, is determinism. Muslims must understand what is determinism, Determinism flies in the face of randomness. There is no such thing as randomness if you are fully deterministic. And then after that, we can have another podcast one day and talk about how free will can be in determinism. You know, Muhammad, we talked about the two twin trains of Leibniz, you know, the twin trains. But, you know, in the Quran, it talks about two rivers side by side. And there can be free will, even if the outside world is perfectly deterministic. And even the atheists will agree that the world is deterministic. You know, in philosophy, we say you either believe in determinism or you don't understand it. Because in philosophy, we have consensus of determinism. We have a consensus. We cannot see the world otherwise. And determinism is a Muslim idea. It's a very Muslim idea, even regardless of whether Muslims know it or not. It's a very, very Muslim idea.
So let me throw a curveball.
Please do.
So what if an atheist is to say, no, the universe is not determined because we have quantum fluctuations, and you know what we know from quantum mechanics basically challenges.
You just said the key word, what we know. Listen, to me, for me to understand determinism, I need the totality of evidence. Allah has the totality of evidence and motion and everything that's going on. If you had the totality of knowledge when you looked at quantum physics, it wouldn't seem random to you. From what I know, I am the source of truth. The way I see the dunya is true. You have to humble yourself and say, look, I have a limited knowledge to what is happening in quantum physics. Yeah. To me, it appears this way. Yeah. When they told this to Einstein says God doesn't play dice with the universe. Yeah. This is a shaitan in your mind, an idol in your mind that's telling you that it's random. There is no randomness in the universe. There's only projection of randomness.
Yeah, that was the first round in the first second. I thought I was gonna get away. All right, so Hijab, I mean, I've seen you in discussions, and you've actually, just before we move on to reason, because I know you're going to speak about that, I think it's a very important topic, but I've seen you in discussions and debates with atheists, and one of the things that you highlight with them is that you say to them, look, it's still a problem for you, right? So don't try and make it a problem between Islam and free will, because it's still a huge problem for you. So how do you articulate that, and what's their sort of rebuttals?
Yeah, so it's not just a problem. It's like the discussion of determinism and free will and compatibilism. I think it's a discussion for everyone. It's a discussion for the Christians who have schools of thought which represent, like, for example, Calvinism. John Calvin was a Reformed theologian who wrote a book called The Institutes, and he kind of I think he's got a more radical position than basically Ash'arism. Ash'arism is kind of leaning a little bit more to the determinist side, but they have a concept called kasb. So there is a parallel within the Islamic school of thought, Ash'arism and Calvinism, because both of them have compatibilistic notions. On the other hand, you've got Arminianism, in Christianity, which corresponds more to Mu'tazilism actually, anciently, because Mu'tazilism, they were very skeptical of free will, of determinism. So they were more free will inclined.
Yes.
So Ash'arism was more deterministic inclined, and Mu'tazilism was more free will inclined, and that corresponds to Arminianism in Christianity and Calvinism in the Reformed tradition. So these discussions are being had everywhere. They're being had in Christianity, they're being had in Islam, and they're being had in philosophy.
But they were had in Christianity much later, after the event of Islam.
Exactly. So
they were heavily influenced by the Muslims. Let's be honest here.
Yeah. So they were had in Christianity in like the 16th century mostly. Like this
exactly.
is John Calvin. We're talking about 16th century Arminianism was really a response to Calvinism. Like these discussions in Islam have been had in the first century of Islam, actually, the first century of Islam. Mm-hmm. These discussions were being had. So the Qadariya came out. The Qadariya are these people that they didn't believe in the Qadar or they didn't believe in determinism, and then the extreme opposite of that, the Jabariya came out. They said no, there's no such thing as free will, it's all determinism. And then the Ash'aris consolidated the two kinds of notions.
How could a man read the Quran and not understand that the Quran is 100% deterministic?
Yeah, I think that's why.
Here's the problem with it. Mu'tazila said, "Oh, if Allah knows everything you're gonna do, how could you have free will?"
Yeah.
They weren't able to. So they said Allah only knows in the general of what He knows when you're gonna die roughly. He knows what you're gonna, if you're whether
I
you.
think that was the philosopher that made it. That's what Ibn Sina said. He knows that Allah does not know the particulars. But the Mu'tazila were more on the Qadri side. So the Mu'tazila are more on there's no such thing as determinism. So they were, and I think the reason was justice. They had an issue with that, and how does that comply with justice and so on. But the Ash'aris were more on the determinism side, and they did have something called kasb though. The kasb, this idea of earning, it's called like earning, but it's basically a compatibilistic notion. So they still believe that we have free will, but how that's negotiated is discussed. And obviously the Atharis, which are people like Ibn Taymiyyah and so on. And one of the best books I feel like haven't been translated on this matter in the Arabic language is called Ash-Shifa al-Alil. I've been looking for, I think there is one translation, but it's a rough translation and it's not for the whole book. I can't remember the translator's name, but maybe we can find it. But basically the notion is that there is a balance, but everything is determined. Allah determined everything, but we still have free will. And this is basically the upper notion. It's like that there is free will and there is determinism, and that they are compatible. So it's a kind of compatibilist notion, but it's not the same as the compatible school of thought within philosophy, which is what, like for example, John Stuart Mill is associated with, or others. Hobbes is also a compatibilist. So there are slight differences. What's really interesting is how it's negotiated, though. Like someone what's his name? Sorry, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, who wrote this book of Shifa al-Alil. He negotiates it in a really powerful way. He says, like for example, Allah, because the issue has always been this. There's one issue, which is, and this is the issue that basically John Calvin was dealing with, right? If you say that we are in charge of our own actions, then that detracts from the omnipotence of God. This is the main issue they had. The moment you say, if you watch a debate, a determinism versus, a Calvin versus Arminian debate, this is the kind of discussion they're going to have, right? Mm-hmm. If you say that we are in charge of our actions, the omnipotence of God is endangered. But the way Ibn Qayyim deals with it, he says that God created our actions, but he didn't do our actions. And the distinction between creation and doing is different. He demarcates between the two, and that's an interesting way of dealing with it, because it maintains the omnipotence of God, and but at the same time, you do have a scope of free will.
Explain again how he harmonizes them.
He says that, look, so for example, he says that he says the omnipotence of God is that the fact that he's all powerful and so on, and he says that God creates, because there's a verse in the Quran says he's the one who created you and what you do. So he says that based on that verse,
let's not forget this verse. I'm going to bring it up later, but go on, please continue.
Yeah. He says that based on this verse, God creates you, yes, and your actions are also created by him. So our actions are created by God. But he says at the same time, we do our own actions. So he basically differentiates between doing and creation. So he says that the relationship that God has with our actions is a creative relationship, whereas the relationship I have with my own actions is a volitional relationship. I do it because I'm doing it. So he's saying that the omnipotence of God. So the problem that John Calvin and co had, which is that saying that if I do my own actions, then that detracts from the omnipotence of God. He solves it by saying, well, even if you do your own actions, that's the creation of God, but it's your action. It's not God's action in that sense. God doesn't act for you. This
is, if you read Leibniz's Wikipedia page, if you go to pre-established harmony, this is what they called Leibniz's following theory that I'm going to describe to you: pre-established harmony. They say it's a development from Al-Ash'ari's occasionalism. He basically developed it and reworded it in a way that was more understandable to the Europeans. Think about it like this. Allah created a clockwork universe. When I move my hand like this, let's say I go and I reach for this object here, Allah made your hand move. The domino effect, the causal chain in the universe is complete. When I look at the human machine, I could tell you everything that human being is going to do. If you give me every single position. So think of it like dominoes. If I have 1,000 dominoes and I see domino 1 hit domino 2, domino 2 hit domino 3. I could tell you that when domino 98 hits domino 99, that domino 99 is going to hit domino 100 before it happens. This is determinism. Everything is happening. Things are pushing against one another. Laplace said, I can do that with a human being, just like I can predict to you what's going to happen on the billiard ball table. I can predict to you where a human being's hand is going to be in 10 years from now, what he's going to do. So you have this causal line, this causal chain of one thing triggering another. Me and you right now, we're having this conversation because of things that happened in the past. The things that happened in the past are forcing us to have this conversation we're having here today, physically speaking. So this is the creation of Allah. Allah created this incredible chain, but He harmonized it with your free will. Your free will is actually inert. It cannot change the dunya whatsoever. So for instance, if I wanted to kill somebody and Allah didn't predetermine that it's going to happen, it will not happen, even though my heart is intending to kill you. So in the Quran says, if they wanted to bring the whole dunya against you, they couldn't. Okay, if it happens to you, it was maktub. What's the first thing Allah He creates in the Quran? The pen. The pen, whether you take it literally or not, is a symbol of determinism. Everything is written. We are fatalistic. Nothing, you cannot change what's going to happen. What does Allah say? What does God say to those who are punished in the fire? He says, they say, send us back. He says, if I send you back, you'll do it again. It was maktub. It's pre-established. Everything you see in the physical world, you have no control over it. Even when you move your own hand. However, you have this thing inside you that is free. You have a free will. You have a soul that is free. It's not part of the causal chain. However, when I move my hand to grab onto something, the timing was so perfect. It's a pre-established harmony. You think you moved your hand, but you did not move your hand. You willed your hand to move, and that will is inert. You know, a great example of this, you ever seen The Simpsons? You ever seen the intro, the famous intro, where the little baby's driving? She's turning left, and the car's turning left, and she's turning right, the car's turning right. But then she honks, and you see all of a sudden they pan out, and it's the mother driving. She was just synchronized with the mother. She thinks she's turning the car, she's not. So there's a parallel trains, as Leibniz says it. In the Quran, it says 2 rivers. There's 2 rivers with a barrier between it. Okay, the 2 rivers. Imam Al-Jalani says it's the seen and the unseen world. The seen world is, think of the brain, the physical world, and the unseen world, think of it as your mind, everything that exists in your mind, the unseen. These 2 are parallel to one another. They're close to one another. You think you're moving, but one river is destined by Allah. He created the clockwork universe. And is your heart in alignment with Allah? This is the thing. If you see something happen, let's say, for instance, I don't know, give me your soccer team loses.
Yeah.
And you're angry and you're bitter about it. This was the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to harmonize yourself with what Allah did. This is the solution to the problem of evil. There's a wisdom why there's something good that's going to come out of this this victory for those, this loss for your team, your soccer team. Something good is going to come out of it. And I'll tell you something. Leibniz says we live in the most perfect world possible. Let me give you his argument why. Okay, and it's a very Muslim argument. In my opinion, he must. When I read Leibniz, I told myself he had to have read the Quran, and he had to have studied the Muslim thinkers that came before him. He must have. And then when I read Immanuel Kant, I said, "Wow, this guy, what he's saying here is so Muslim influence." And then I discovered recently that he, his thesis, his PhD thesis, he writes in his own handwriting. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Look it up, okay? He writes Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And let me tell you something. He for sure read the classic Muslim thinkers. For sure, 100%. There's no doubt. Anyways, so your soccer team lost. Leibniz is going to tell you something very Islamic. He's going to say, look, this world was created by Allah. Was created by a perfect being. So it had to be done perfectly. There couldn't have been an improvement. If your child died, there's a wisdom here. There's something good in this. You think it's bad because, again, you put yourself as the center of the dunya. You say, the way I interpret the world is the truth. This is wrong. Because also you've adopted the belief that death is the final chapter. When somebody's sad, when the Prophet ﷺ, his son Ibrahim died and he cried, people were shocked. And he said, don't be callous. I'm crying because I'm separated from him, not because I'm not going to see him again. So you can mourn. Of course you can mourn. But a Muslim doesn't believe this is the end. right?
Yeah.
Now, an atheist believes this is the end and he's going to cry, and he has a reason to cry. Obviously, it's going to hurt. But according to Leibniz, according to the Muslim point of view, the dunya, the way it is, everything that happens, if you interpret it as bad, is because you're taking your opinion as the center of the universe. You're taking your opinion as true.
You've made yourself your God.
You've made yourself an authority. Exactly. Unless
Yeah.
you should say, Allahu Alam, there's a wisdom in this. Inshallah, it'll come to light in the future. Inshallah, I'll understand what the wisdom behind this is. Whenever you see an event in the dunya, you have to harmonize with, this is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He made the dunya like this, and I have to yield, submit.
Yeah.
I have to accept it, that this is the case.
So just on that point, sorry to interrupt. We're at the 1 hour 15 mark, and there's a few topics we needed to cover. Because Brother Firaz, we know you're running an entire.
No rush. I'm off the gym tonight, so take your time.
Oh, okay, that's good. So just a
I
few.
can't hear you. No, I don't hear you anymore.
You don't hear me anymore?
No more sound.
I can hear you. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me now?
There's no more sound.
Hijab, can you hear me?
Oh, I hear you.
I can hear you. Yeah.
I can hear you now.
So I think we can dedicate a different show just on free will, and we can do another one, inshallah, on consciousness. Coming back to fighting faith, because I think, definitely.
Just what? Sorry, Sabur. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yep.
But just a death blow to anybody who says we don't have free will.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, because we'll do it again. We'll go step by step. But how would you know you're determined if you didn't have free will? See, Sam Harris is a hard determinist, and he wrote, his fans, one time I was going back and forth with them, and they're like, he wrote a book on it. I said, no, he didn't. He can't write a book if he's determined. It's like saying, look, my computer is determined. Look, when I push the brake in my car, the brake has no choice. The car has no choice but to brake. When I push the accelerator, it has no choice but to accelerate. It is determined. There's a causal chain that causes it to accelerate. Now, if I say I wrote a book, that means I must have free will. I didn't write this book. The dunya wrote this book. You would have to say, if you're a true determinist, we do believe in free will. Even the most hard determinists must believe in free will, because we wouldn't know. Look, a robot is determined. He has no idea he's determined. There's no light on. Okay, so we have proof, 100% proof Allah gave us free will. But when we observe the dunya, we see only determinism.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure, because I know there's going to be a whole debate on it. I just wanted to deal the death blow before anybody. And please answer me that question. How would I know I am determined if I was truly determined? Okay, because I believe in compatibility. I believe in determinism and free will, and they are not contradictory.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you brought that up here, because especially I think with this, when you mention one, you have to mention the other as well, because it's just one of those things that people, they'll have so many questions about, oh, well, if that's the case, then what? What about the free will aspect? And then questions about justice always creep into people's minds as well. About, oh, well, how could it be just? How could it be just? But there's a beautiful one thing I want to say. There's a beautiful poetry. I can't remember who actually wrote this in Arabic, but there's a beautiful poetry that was said. ومن عجائب الجبار أن يجبر العباد بالاختيار. And one of the wondrous nature, or one of the wondrous features of the compeller, in this case it's Allah, is that he compelled his slaves to be free. In other words, it's the apex, it's the epitome of being able to of being the omnipotent one, is to allow and to give permission to his own slaves to do their own actions.
He determined me to be free. He determined me to know that I'm determined.
Yeah, exactly.
We are self-aware. We are self-aware. This is miraculous.
Yeah.
We've broken out of the causal chain somehow, some way. This is miraculous.
Absolutely.
And that's where it becomes, like, in terms of talking about the mechanism of how it's pretty much like talking about the consciousness issue or the life issue. How God does that, I don't know if anyone knows or will ever know how that God does that. How he allows us to be free, make our own decisions, while still being in control of everything. But obviously, as you said, if we go to Ibn Qayyim's discussion, he creates us, but he lets us do our own action. He creates us, but he lets us, and that's an important distinction. He lets us do our own action, but we don't do our own action unless Allah wills. And that's why the Quran says, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ.
Yeah. So good, saved by the bell. Before the admin kills me, I need to move on to the other topics, because there's we're going to give a chance to the audience to ask some questions as well. But going back to fighting faith and what I mentioned earlier, in a world of nihilism, in a world of atheism, in a world that there is no purpose, meaning, value, any of these things, we have no reason to be good. There is no good, there is no evil. It's all blind, mechanical, essentially. And like we were speaking earlier about the veneer of civility and morality and ethics and these things, underneath it we can be really selfish when these sort of things happen. Now, atheism and its impact on morals, this is a very interesting point. And Habib is obviously very popular because of the way he's respected his father, because of the way that he kept his word to his mother. And the morals, I mean, even non-Muslims have seen those morals, taking care of your parents, making your father above your friends, right? So atheism and its erosion of the values that society holds, whether it's in the Christian world or the Muslim world, I'd just like you guys to give some of your thoughts on that. So going over to you, Brother Faraz, because obviously you've seen firsthand the impact of being principled and having faith, and how faith gives you those sort of timeless intrinsic values and without. So what are some of your thoughts on this?
Well, if you're a true atheist, there's no such thing as morality. There's only aesthetics. So Genghis Khan could say rape is good. If a Mongol rapes, it's good. Why? Because there's more Mongols in the world. They see rape as good. They can give any narrative they want. Because Genghis Khan is the most powerful, might is right, and he's the one he's drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah.
Then tomorrow a new leader comes by, he's more powerful than Genghis Khan, and he says, no, rape is haram, rape is bad. And he draws a line in the sand. And all these lines they're synthetic, they're made up.
Yeah.
Except for one line, there's only one being that can draw a line, and his authority is perfect. And then right and wrong would be a fact. It would be a matter of fact. Nobody could debate this, and nobody could ever supersede it.
Yeah.
If God says murder is wrong, then it is wrong. It's not up to debate.
Yeah.
So there is no morality, and this is Epicurus' is a conundrum. So Epicurus said, I don't believe in God because there's evil in the world. Listen to what he says. He says, I don't believe in God, Epicurus, a Greek thinker. He says, because I see evil. Little babies die in the world. Well, by saying you see evil, by saying you identify that there's evil, that means there's good and there's bad. If there's good and there's bad, there has to be Allah. You wouldn't know there's good and evil. If I go to a tiger and talk to him about good and evil, he's gonna be like, look, there's no good and evil here. There's only what fills my belly. That's it. Human beings, we have this thing where we have, it feels wrong to steal from my brother. It feels wrong to kill somebody. I have this inner conscience. Now, again, Immanuel Kant, he said this. He says, look, I have this moral law within me. Listen to what he says. He says, I believe in the afterlife because I have this moral law within me. Sticks and stones will never have a moral law. Sticks and stones, robots, machinery, mechanics, physics. Immanuel Kant said something so poetically, so beautiful. He said, there'll never be a Newton for a blade of grass. Meaning that blade of grass, there's a component called life. Newton's laws will never explain this thing that it has, this life. It grows, the sun shines upon it and it grows. Life will never be subject to Newtonian law. So he said, look, I have within me this moral law. I see things and I think it's bad, it's haram, it's evil. And I see that people die before justice came to them. He says, I believe that justice has to come because I wouldn't have this concept of right and wrong if God didn't exist. It would be impossible. I'd be part of the animal kingdom. In the animal kingdom, they don't have halal and haram. They don't have wrong and right. There's kill or be killed only. Guys, with that said, I got to take 1 second break. I got to change shirt, please. Give me 1 second.
That's fine. For the audience, please, can you guys post some questions so we can put them to Brother Firas? And as the questions are coming, I will ask the admin to actually highlight them. So on this point, hijab, respect that Habib was showing, and the breakdown of morals generally when you have an atheistic, hedonistic lifestyle. How do we
Sorry about
How-
that, guys. My
Yeah.
apologies.
Actually, you were making a point. I was moving over to hijab, but actually, do you remember where you were?
Me?
Yes.
You wouldn't know there's evil or good if
Yes.
God didn't exist. Okay,
Yeah.
it would be just aesthetics. I see this as beautiful. I see this as attractive. I see this as ugly. Rape is inconvenient for me, so I'm going to make it illegal in the state. This is where you that if you're an atheist, this is the approach you have to take. Because the truth of the matter is, okay, atheists observed theistic civilizations, and they said, look, they have something good. These laws. Don't kill, don't steal, don't covet your neighbor's wife. All these things, these are good. Let's borrow them, but let's not worship their god. Where did halal and haram, where did good and evil come from? Every civilization, and this is in the Quran as well. Okay, but observe every civilization. Find me a civilization that didn't have a religion. Find me one. Please name one. There is no civilization that didn't have a religion.
Yeah.
First there was a religion, and then civilization grew from there. If we didn't have a religion, we'd be just in the jungle.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that you raised this point, because evolutionary psychologists say we need these myths to keep us going, right? Civilization and even human cooperation is fundamentally based upon collective fictions like morality, civilization, corporations. All of these things fundamentally is what allowed human beings to build mega cities and civilizations. Without these, what they would say is myths, the belief in God and the belief in objective morals, these things we would simply be, like you said, in very small hunter-gatherer communities.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen the Supreme Court justice in the US? They have the 18 great lawgivers.
Right.
18 great lawgivers. So they founded their laws on these 18 inspirational figures. One of them is Moses alayhi salam, and one of them is Muhammad alayhi salam. They have a statue of him holding a Quran. When I ask these atheists, who taught you right and wrong? Where did you learn it from? Oh, you learned it from religions. You learned it from religions. Men are touched by God, and they said, this is wrong. This is evil. This is bad. This displeases the higher power. There is no right and wrong if there is no God. I could just take what I want from you. I could just chop your head off. It would be the law of the jungle. There is no right and wrong without God. So if you believe in right and wrong, you're telling me you believe in God. If you tell me, no, it's just aesthetics, then you can be atheist. Then you could say, look, there's no right and wrong. I'm giving lip service here that I think rape is bad. But if nobody was looking, and I would maybe, I could rape. Why not? It's to my benefit. What is there to harm me? There's no repercussion. My fellow man is just matter. Like, nihilism will take us there if you go far enough. Look, you could be a naive atheist, but if you're a well-understood atheist, you have to say that all my good behaviors are a moral construct. It's a sociological construct. It's fake. I'm not really a good person. I'm faking it. I'm giving you lip service. If I had the chance, I would take what I can from you. I'm not truly good, because the fact of the matter is, to be truly good is to believe that it's literally wrong. You literally believe it's wrong. It's not to your benefit.
Yeah.
It might be to my benefit to kill a person. He's my competitor. But I won't do it. It might be to my worldly benefit. But I wouldn't do it. You know why? Because it's morally wrong. Then you have a true belief in right and wrong. However, if I don't do it because I'm scared the police are going to put me in jail, then you're not truly morally wrong, right or wrong. You're not truly morally. You don't truly believe in morality. You believe you're weighing consequence and reward.
Yeah. So sorry, just one sec. Admin, could you just put up that question again? The one about secularism becoming a religion. So on your point, Brother Faraz, that obviously those 18 people that that we have laws that derive from them, and the foundation of civil society fundamentally does have this religious basis. What would you say to the people who say, yeah, I mean, religion is like that rusty ladder which got us to a position, but now we can see it's rusty, we can discard it, so we can live meaningful, ethical lives, even if the genesis of it, right, was not exactly correct. So they would say, we'll take the good and we'll leave the bad, and we don't need to take it as a complete package. What would your response be to that?
Well, here's what's going to happen, and it's already happening. You're going to start seeing everything as measurable. You're going to start seeing society as nuts and bolts. Like, for instance, when I first met my wife, I saw she was beautiful. So I wanted to marry her. Tomorrow, if she's not beautiful, I'm going to replace her with a younger girl. Why not? Because that's why I married her in the first place. She attracted me. However, if I believe in Allah, I say, no, I want to love her for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She has a meaning to me. She's my wife. Now there's this extra material that I truly believe in. But an atheist doesn't believe in this. An atheist says, no, you know what? It's the measurements, it's the look, it's the youth. How can I survive and reproduce with her? How many children could she bore me? Now everything is quantifiable. If it's not quantifiable, like Hume said, cast it to the flames. It's either mathematical or scientific. If not, cast it to the flames. Well, you know what? Love is not quantifiable. Peace is not quantifiable. All these beautiful things that make our society civilized are not quantifiable. Why do you think Hitler had no problem killing so many people? Because to him, he's an engineer in his mind. The world is just nuts and bolts. Everything that's quantifiable, I believe in. If I could put it in a test tube, I believe in it. If I cannot put it into a test tube, throw it in the heap. So if we tell them, look, how could you kill a human being? They have a life. They have a soul. No. That's just rearranging matter. We're back to nuts and bolts. If you're a true atheist, you have to reduce everything to nuts and bolts. Your wife, your kids, there's no such thing as love. Love is a chemical that seeps in your brain, and it's a trick of the mind. Nothing that is not quantifiable can exist.
That's a point that often goes over people's heads. They don't actually think about it. But like you said, with Hume, and even his argument that he makes in his book, that whatever is not something that we can empirically verify, cast it in the fire. Well, even his own book and the concepts in his book, and us wanting to get to truth, and all these things, these value judgments, how do you make them quantifiable? How do you make them measurable? Now, you linked, interestingly, hedonism to the discussion, right? That you'll just be looking at what gives you the greatest pleasure. Okay, so it's not about a marriage being a stable mechanism to allow society to flourish. And like Umar radiallahu anhu said, about a man who wanted to divorce his wife. He didn't want him to divorce his wife just because she's old. And, we don't just go with these superficial things. We have these higher values that we want to stick to. So, hijab, atheists would say, look, fine, we need these intrinsic values. We need these value judgments. We need these things to keep us going. But we can ground them in a purely materialistic worldview. Fair enough, they originally came from religion, and you guys are trying to make us accept religion again through them. But I'm sure there's a way of grounding those intrinsic human values which put together the fabric of society. We can ground them in a materialistic worldview. How would you respond to that?
I wouldn't have to respond to that. I'd ask them to do. I would ask them to go ahead and do that, because if we're talking about objective morality here, particularly, like in the sense, when I talk about objective morality, we have to be very clear what we're talking about. We're not talking about morality in general. We're not talking about something which is, like he said, is like for us said, is aesthetic value judgment. We're talking about objective morality in the same sense as you can claim that 2 + 2 = 4 is objective. We're talking about the fact that if all human beings were wiped away from the face of the earth, would murder, for example, or rape still be wrong? As an abstraction, would that concept of murder and rape, would that still be wrong? And on materialism and atheism, now what mechanism are you going to give me to show me that if we wiped away all the human beings on the face of the earth and all life species, that abstraction would still be wrong? Because that is what it is. It's an abstraction. It's a concept, really, that is immeasurable. It cannot be put under a microscope. How does that even fit a materialistic worldview? It's a concept. These moralities are concepts. They're not even physical. They're not even something you can.
You cannot
assess.
put it in a test tube. How could you believe in it? You see, that's the thing. I always say I don't believe
in their existence in the first place.
I always tell atheists I don't believe in atheism. I don't think atheism is a possibility. Because if I cross-examine them long enough, they have multiple gods. They believe in multiple gods. They always believe in this thing that's conceptual in their mind, a ghost in their mind. And I pointed out to them, first of all, if you believe in that minds exist, a mind, you cannot put it in a test tube. It's not quantifiable, just the mind. And you know what? In philosophy, famously, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Now, that's a discussion on its own. That's a 3-hour episode on its own. But he said, look, I have a mind, and I'm certain of it because I have thoughts. And to have thoughts, I have to have a mind. Okay, so he said, look, one thing I cannot doubt is the mind. I can't doubt it. However, try to prove that logically or scientifically. You cannot. You have to have an experience of mind. So that's very unscientific, because the true question we're supposed to be asking here, Sabur and Muhammad, is science absolute? Does science capture all of the evidence? Like, does it have a totality of evidence? Does it speak to the totality of evidence? Is there anything that escapes science? And yes, there is. It's a resounding yes. Because in philosophy, if you go far enough, the things that we're 100% certain of are not known scientifically. And they're not even known logically. This is the beauty of Ghazali. Ghazali said this, he said something so beautiful. He said, look, when you were a little baby, you believed in your senses. If your senses told you something was hot, you believed it. If your senses told you something was large, you believed it. If your senses told you something was sharp, you believed it. And as you got older, you started to question your senses, because your intellect, as it developed, it usurped the authority of your senses. So, for instance, he says, I see a star in the sky, and it looks like a little jewel. But I know via the calculations that because it's so far away, it must be massive. It's not a small, tiny jewel. It must be a massive heavenly body. It must be colossal. The intellect usurps the authority of the senses. You no longer take what your eye sees now. Now you say, oh, I see the sun go around the earth. My eyes are being tricked. The intellect tells you that's a trick. Oh, I see the world is flat. It seems in appearance it's flat. No, that's a trick of the eye. The eye doesn't see the totality of evidence. The world is actually round. Ghazali asks, is there something that is going to usurp the intellect? As we mature as human beings, is there something out there, like the senses, touch, taste, smell, and hearing? Their authority was usurped by the intellect. And as when you were a young kid, you didn't know about the intellect. You haven't developed it yet. Is there something that's going to supersede the intellect now? And he says yes, and it's intuition. It's first-hand experience. And to have this first-hand experience of the mind, etc., consciousness, etc., once you realize these things, you realize we cannot say there is no divinity. There is something. We're having an experience of the divine directly.
That's quite
And
deep.
that argument, for anybody who wants more information, there's a video which we can post in the comments called The Abrahamic Experience. And this brother Faraz goes through that in a lot more detail, because some of the arguments that obviously hijab and other brothers who are making arguments against atheism, they directly challenge their arguments, or they put forward a positive argument. But with this particular argument, the Abrahamic experience, and why I like it is it completely flanks them. I mean, because what they usually do is they think of reason as the highest thing, and it just challenges that assumption, and then they don't know what to do.
Reason is not absolute. Ibn Taymiyyah said it beautifully. He said, okay, you think reason is absolute? Whose reason do we use? Plato and Aristotle, did they agree? No, they differed completely. Who are your most famous intellectuals today? Name me somebody. Who's a famous intellectual? Name me 2 famous intellectuals. They always disagree. They agree on some things and disagree on major components. We cannot even define. If you give me 100 philosophers and you say, okay, everybody write down the definition of truth, we disagree.
Yeah.
Philosophers, we disagree on what the word truth means. Okay, Ghazali, first of all, you know that there are many definitions to truth.
Yeah,
even scientific truth it rests on consensus.
Yeah.
There was a time where they believed all flamingos were pink. Recently I read an article where we found the scientists found a salivary gland.
Yeah.
There's a new discovery.
Yes.
So if I asked you how many salivary glands, I can't remember how many it was. Let's say it's X. Throughout the ages, that's how much we counted. Now there's a mini scientific revolution. A new salivary gland has been discovered. Now you have to take your biology books and we have to update them. We cannot get a consensus on the definition of truth. However, this is the beauty of Ghazali. If you read his book, The Niche of Lights, There is one thing. La ilaha illallah is actually the only thing that is truly 100% objective in the entire dunya. If you read Surah Ikhlas, you'll understand where Ghazali is coming from. There is only one hard objective reality in the world, in existence. There's only one. Everything else seems objective or subjective. So I'll give a really brief explanation. Descartes said, look at an orange. It has objective and subjective. He used the word primary and secondary. Okay, so he said, look, there's objective qualities to this thing. It has a certain weight. If I weigh it, or Muhammad weighs it, or Sabur weighs it, we're all going to come to the same conclusion. It has a certain circumference. If I measure its circumference, or Muhammad or Sabur, we're all going to come to the same agreement. Those aspects of the orange are objective. Now it has subjective qualities. Is the orange delicious? Well, that's subjective. Firas, Muhammad, Sabur might have different opinions. What shade of orange does it appear to you? Is it a beautiful color? Is orange a beautiful color? Well, again, that's subjective.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out if you're skeptical enough, because you have to understand, like the Muslims in the Golden Age were highly skeptical. Al-Ashari, Imam Ghazali. Imam Ghazali was a supremely skeptical person. Like, they say that Descartes revolutionized philosophy by taking skepticism to a radically new height. It's not true. Ghazali did it 600 years before him. Okay, Ghazali asked, how do you know you're not dreaming right now? How do you know you're not having a hallucination that you're dreaming?
Yeah.
So Ghazali would tell you, look, even the most objective things you said about that orange are truly subjective.
Yeah.
Now let me explain to you why. Okay, so I'll give you an example of the seashore. Muhammad, we've talked about this in the past. If I want to measure a seashore, the shore, okay, from point A to point B, if I use a 1 meter stick to measure, and I lay that 1 meter stick over itself, I might come to the measurement that the shore from A to B is 10 kilometers long. Okay. Now, instead of using that 1 meter stick, I'm going to use a 30 centimeter ruler. Okay. I'm going to lay it over itself. And now all of a sudden, the shore, because that ruler is more precise, it can go into the nooks and crannies a little bit more. Now that shore is 15 meters long. I went from measuring it objectively, I got a result of 10 meters. Now the second time I measure it, I got a result of 15 meters. Well, now I'm going to use a 1 meter wheel. The 1 meter wheel, the surface area is even smaller. That wheel, that wheel that every time it does a revolution, you get a 1 meter measurement. Well, now that's going to go in the nooks and crannies even deeper. And now I have a 20 kilometer measurement. So which one is it? Is it 10 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters? Well, it depends on the tool you're using. Well, I can go so far as to measure between the subatomic particles. Well, now we're getting crazy here. Eventually, it's going to disappear. The seashore is going to disappear on me. It depends on the measurement you're using, on what tool you're using to measure the seashore. So even the most objective things, they dissolve.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys ever heard the ship of Theseus. I'm sure we've talked about it. You ever hear about this, Sabur, the ship of Theseus? Theseus had a ship, 99 parts.
No.
And every week a new part was replaced because it was worn out.
Oh yeah.
And over time, 99 parts are replaced. And the ship of Theseus is on the ocean. And we all call it the ship of Theseus. We say that's the ship of Theseus. But those 99 parts you replaced, they had harbored them in the garage somewhere. And now they reassemble those 99 pieces. Which one is the ship of Theseus? See, the ship of Theseus is only known by the mind. It's a projection of the mind. It's not actually physically out there. It's also subjective. If you read Imam Ghazali's work, eventually you come to La ilaha illallah. There's only one thing that exists truly objectively. That is not. It's not subject. It is not subject to any relativity.
Yeah.
Every mathematical equation, every mathematical measurement you took of the dunya is all at the mercy of some type of subjectivity. And that's why Abyssinia, Muhammad Hijab, we talked about this once, when he said there is existence. Well, that's not subject to, that's not known via mathematics or scientific experiment. It's not subject to any subjectivity at all. That is a hard objectivity, absolute objectivity. Existence, all existence, this thing we call existence, is known. How do you know it? Is it a question of IQ? Is it a question of scientific understanding? No, it's not. It's known directly. It's known intuitively.
Yeah.
This is what Imam Ghazali was saying. Look, there are things you know intuitively, and these are superior to logic, because logic, you can make a mistake. Scientific experiments, there could always be a revolution. We thought there were X amount of glands in the throat. Look at this. Now it's been replaced. There's a new number of glands. But this true objectivity, existence, having a direct experience of God, is not questionable. It's not cross-examinable. You cannot cross-examine me on it, and I cannot possibly make a mistake.
Absolutely. And you know, the deeper we get into this topic, I can see there's avenues for us to go left and right and actually do entire live streams on just each particular area. And because we've come to the 1 hour 30 mark, I just want to, for both of you, give you the chance to give some final thoughts about fighting faith, the value of faith in this secular world, the benefits that faith brings along, and just some of your thoughts. So let's start with the hijab.
Yes, I think a lot of the stuff that we discussed today, I started off by talking about like the anchorage and the purpose that faith gives you, and then we've talked about some stuff which is really important to the discourse, including morality. I think one of the key things, like how do we actually know objectively what is right and wrong? And when you have faith in God, you know, you can be assured that what you're doing is right and is wrong. It's not just a subjective value judgment. It's not a sociological construct. It's actually truly right and wrong. And going back to being principled, I mean, what better anchorage can you have for being principled than being principled on principles were actually real in the first place? Because we talk about being principled as an individual, but why would you even want to be? It's not even attractive to be principled on principles which are going to change next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So it gives you, I would say, a dignity, a self-dignity, and a self-respect, you know, and meaning and purpose like no other. And we were talking about Khabib, and I think that, you know, one of the things I feel like with him, there's two things. I mean, people like McGregor and so on, they live in their life on a completely different paradigm, and in my opinion, they just they're very much money, like with their own admission, they're money motivated and so on. And so if the money's right, you can get anyone to do anything they want. And so when he realized that, you know, Khabib is not coming back because there's something greater for him than the money, and it was his principles, that his word to his mother, his word to he's taking care of his parents and so on. Those principles are more valuable than anything else. And when people see that, especially from the Western world, living in a materialistic consumer society, I think it just kind of forces them to rethink their own positions, quite frankly. And what I liked about the whole, I mean, putting aside all the things that we can say about MMA, we've had those discussions and the jurisprudence and all that. What is interesting as a case study with the Khabib example, just to final comments on that, is that, you know, back in the days I used to watch wrestling, WWE wrestling. You know, there was a character called Muhammad Hassan. I'm not sure if you guys remember.
Really? I don't remember him.
Yeah. He was a character. He came about maybe about 10 years ago. Or 15 years ago.
Yeah, he came in around the time of the Iraq War.
So yes, really?
Okay. So yeah, I don't know. It's 2003, and basically this guy was the most booed guy and most hated guy in the whole of the, like. I actually recently saw an interview with him. He's actually Italian. He's not even an Arab. His character was an Arab guy with like the whole, like, you know, shimar and the whole 9 yards, yeah. And he was hated and this and that. And his little promos, he'd come out on the ring and he'd say things which are true. He'd say things like, "Oh, there's Islamophobia, or the Arab Americans are being mistreated," and everyone would just boo the guy and stuff like that. And at the end, I think the way they got rid of the guy, he got humiliated in the ring or something like that, and they threw him out of the ring, or I can't remember the scene that they had. And I think that, to be honest with you, a lot of people in America wanted the same thing to happen with Khabib, because what was with him is he represents everything America hates. he or has hated for the last 20-30 years, Muslim and Russian. Like you put the two
Yeah,
together.
exactly. The Cold War and the Islamic
The
war.
war on terror.
The Middle East and the Cold War together.
Yeah, exactly. So you put basically the American foreign policy enemies for the last 30 years. You put him in a guy that's speaking in this guy, and then what they would have loved to happen to him, right, is what happened to Muhammad Hassan. Just humiliated, beaten,
yes.
and then the Great White Hope comes and finishes it off, and it's either Conor or Poirier or Gaethje. But it's never going to happen. And what's happened here is that he's been humanized as well. Like the case study is really interesting because, at the end of it, his father died, and we all saw the human aspect of Khabib. So not only was he this talent, but he was also human. And so now the Americans have to come to terms. Okay, this guy, he represents Muslims, or he's a Muslim, and he's a principled guy. He cares about his parents, and so on and so forth. And that's the power of religion in practice. We talked a lot in theory today, but in practice, we see the glimmers of that in personalities, and I feel like that's I could talk forever about what it does for me, but really I think the proof is really in the pudding, in the sense that when you know someone who's truly religious and they abide by their principles, and you see it where they're not willing to bend over backwards for money and so on and so forth, you're forced to, if you don't like it, you're forced to respect it. You're forced to respect it. And that's why I think someone like Joe Rogan, who and others, like their commentary, I feel like, I don't know, but their commentary on Khabib has completely shifted. Like in the Ally Quenta fight, he was very critical, and then he started realizing he's getting heat, and they started realizing, man, this is gonna my agenda here or something might be exposed. So he started being much more consistent, and because you're forced to respect him, you're forced to respect him as a person, you're forced to respect him as a sportsman as well. So I think that our best option as Muslims is, we have to try, if not get people to like us, but we have to kind of get people to respect us through living that principled lifestyle, sticking by our word and doing what we need to do. Because we can talk all day theoretically, but the practical aspect of it, I think, is the most powerful.
Amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah. So over to you, Faraz. I love the example of the worst of the two, Russian and Muslim.
Yep. They've been bred to hate Russian and Muslim. It's incredible. But for closing thoughts, I would say, look, I think when you read the Quran closely, you see that Allah is always referring to you to your natural religion. Muslims, human beings are born with a natural religion. When you read the Quran, you find that natural religion that you are born with. And I think that video, the Abrahamic experience, is a very important one. People need to reroot themselves with the Abrahamic experience. The Quran says Abraham was on the right path before the Torah or the Injil was written, before scripture. Why? He had submitted to his natural religion already. He had understood, he had the Abrahamic experience, the experience of one God. And like we've talked about in the past, there cannot be more than one God. It's an impossibility. When I ask people to define me the number 10, but don't you refer to the number 1, they're going to say, well, it's 5 and 5. Well, what's 5? It's always an infinite regress back to, it's always a regression back to 1. It always started with 1. Before you could believe in 2 gods, you have to believe in 1. And that is the only true number of gods. And when the Abraham Experience video we did, I think it will help clarify that a little more. But I think Muslims need to remember that we have a natural religion within us. When you read the Quran is a mirror of that natural religion. You were born this way. You were born to believe in one God. And no matter how much atheists try to turn the world into nuts and bolts and quantify everything, there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of knowledge. But it's not complete knowledge. It's not absolute. And I always have to remember that it's not absolute. Yes, practice science to the highest degree, but don't become a scientist absolutist, because science does not explain everything. You cannot even explain the human mind. It can explain the human brain, but not the mind, not our consciousness.
Absolutely. And on the point of science, Hassan ibn Haytham, some consider him the first modern scientist because of his sort of innovations with the inductive scientific method and putting that together. He said something beautiful. He said, I study science to get closer to my Lord, right? So he saw science as just a method of ibadah. Now, on that high note, mashallah, the beautiful way you guys have summarized it, I just wanted to end upon a beautiful narration of the Prophet ﷺ, which is related to pretty much everything that we were speaking about. The fact that without faith, there's no morality. Without faith, there is no meaning, value, purpose, no civilization, no hope, no ultimate thing to look forward to, no end goal. And there's a beautiful narration of the Prophet ﷺ, which is found in Bukhari. And the Prophet ﷺ said, the most truthful word ever spoken by an Arab poet is the saying of Labid. Everything besides Allah is in vain. Jazakallah khair, everybody, for joining us. May Allah bless you, brother Faraz. Everyone is really happy to see you on here. We definitely want to bring you on again. For everybody watching, Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.